Hi everyone, myself is Dr. Harish Mallapura Maheshwarappa. I am working as intensivist in the Department of Critical Care Medicine, Narayana Hrudayalaya, Bangalore. So today I'm going to discuss managing COVID-19 in an ICU perspective. So here I'm not going to discuss anything how to diagnose COVID-19 on OPD basis or in the ER, or how to risk stratify the patient, or what personal protective equipment we need to put and how to use them. So all those things I'll come up with a different video. So currently we narrow down discussion to intensive care management of COVID-19. So here we go. So before we go to definitive management of ICU care of patient with COVID-19, we need to know just a bit on pathophysiology, what exactly is going to happen because of the COVID-19 virus. We know that it is a beta coronavirus, and which is an RNA virus. So like other viral etiology, which leads to final outcome is ARDS. So one specificity is we know that ARDS most of the time, so sometimes like lung may get involved as a secondary insult, like it acts as an innocent bystander and get an insult from something which happened somewhere else. But when it comes to corona, so virus itself can damage pneumocytes directly. So rather than something like hyperinflammatory injury, which we expect, like there is some cell infiltrates or proliferative phase as compared to other pneumonia, which leads to ARDS. So other pathophysiology is like cytokine storm. So there is a emerging evidence which suggests that there is a severe exuberant cytokine storm which mimics like that of bacterial sepsis, or we know that there is something called macrophage activation syndrome, that is like hemophagocytic lymphohistiocytosis. So that is some evidence, some molecular rationale, theoretical basis, like which leads to severe cytokine storm. So which also got some potentiation by rising C-reactive protein, ferritin, so which also correlate with the outcome prognosis of the patient with the COVID-19. So which again potentiate the role of cytokine storm in the pathophysiology. So now recently, to add on to this, like COVID-19 is having some atypical presentation in patients. They can manifest with the gut symptoms like diarrhea, vomiting, and other important manifestation which they observed in Spain and Italy, that was involvement of the heart. They had myocarditis and cardiomyopathy, that we'll discuss like in subsequent slides, how to manage and when to suspect myocarditis in next couple of slides. So when it comes to like ARDS, so can we have some risk stratification of the patient who are going to develop the ARDS and who are going to die because of the severe ARDS? So one data which got published in the early of March. So this is a retrospective data among 200 and odd patients with a diagnosed COVID-19 pneumonia, those who admitted between so December 25th and Jan 26th. Last patient recruited was on 13th of February. So data is from Wuhan, which is the epicenter for COVID-19 from China. So they suggest those patients who are elderly, neutropenia, particularly it has lymphopenia, already existing some other organ involvement and coagulation dysfunction, or the highly having a risk factor for developing ARDS and bad outcome, that is the mortality. But interestingly, those patients who had high grade fever, even though they developed the ARDS, they done well in terms of their outcome. So it suggests, so somewhere some immune like response is having a role in terms of the development of the ARDS, that is not possible in neutrophilia patients and those patients with elderly age, so which have some correlation. So that's why if the patient had a fever, so more and more immune mediated response will be there. Even though they had ARDS because of the insult in the lung, they done better in terms of their outcome. Again, the problem with this study, which correlated risk with that of the ARDS, it is a retrospective data. So it is an initial data. So there was no proper preparedness with the medical resources to manage the severe ARDS that also have some impact on the outcome. So other than that, it's a single centered data retrospective analysis. So they have a disproportionate like patient outcome analysis, and there was some selection bias also, but there is some hint. So elderly patient, so some immunocompromised, some organ dysfunction, if they had some coagulopathy, so there is a high chance of development of the ARDS with a bad outcome as compared to the patient with a high grade fever. So again, move on to the management of COVID-19 patients in ICU. So I just divided the therapy into supportive general care and that of the specific care. So when it comes to supportive care, so we need to understand it started from receiving the patient. Okay, suppose if information about potential for COVID-19 has not been provided, see currently, so with the limited option for testing and limited options of rapid diagnostic method and all, so we need to suspect on the basis of their respiratory symptoms. So consider, suppose if you are suspecting a patient on the basis of their symptomatology, they are having COVID-19. So first thing you have to do is like, so try to assess initially from at least a distance of 6 feet, because we know that the most common method of spread of COVID-19 is through the droplets. So droplets are going to settle in an area up to 6 feet. Next modality is by contact method of spreading. So minimize the contact until at least you put a face mask on the patient. If he's coughing, okay, sneezing, or breathing heavily, put at least a face mask with the oxygen therapy device on the patient. So suppose if you are not suspected, okay, but take care the regular universal standard precaution with adequate PPE in that patient. Okay, suppose if the patient came with already existing so nasal cannula with some oxygen going on, so put face mask even on the nasal cannula. So it is very important, at least some burden of droplet infection you can prevent by putting face mask on the patient who had a suspicion on the basis of their symptomatology. Again, suppose you need to transport this patient. Okay, suppose like emergency medical service clinician, they should notify to the receiving healthcare faculty regarding this COVID-19 status. So while transporting the patient, keep patients separated from the relatives and other unnecessary caregivers as much as possible. It is very important because, so even though if you have a suspected or proven COVID, so manage them as a proven COVID-19 and keep very less number of like like surrounding people as much as possible. So if suppose if the patient has been transported from one hospital ICU to other hospital, or within the campus of the health city from one building to other building through the ambulance, so make sure if the ambulance driver compartment is separate than that of the patient compartment, close all the doors and windows tightly. So that is very important. Suppose there are some ambulances where there is no separate cubic or separate compartment for the driver. There you have to make sure is outside air vents are open, and in the patient area, so like keep the exhaust fan to the highest setting, so that which gives some sort of negative pressure and helps in preventing the spread from the patient to the other caregivers, particularly the driver who is driving within the same compartment as that of the patient. Again, so some logistic issues. Okay, you received the patient, where to keep the patient? Okay, so preferably negative pressure isolation, because see now there are lots of papers coming, so we know that the spread is not so airborne, because see the size of the virus is somewhere fits into the droplet and that of the airborne. That's why initially the confusion was, so it is able to spread by airborne, but still the controversies are ongoing. Even WHO is also not totally clarified, so it is not airborne. So airborne, like we have to take care of the patient in negative pressure isolation, but with the limited resources. Okay, currently we have a pandemic, so we might not expect all the patient to get a negative pressure isolation. So then we have to consider cohorting them. Okay, so cohort them in a particular area, but while cohorting, so make sure at least in between the patient distance should be at least 6 feet. So then, so currently, if with the limited availability of the ICU bed, we can convert operation theater or recovery room to an ICU with a temporary infrastructure like ventilator and monitoring and oxygen therapy devices and all. So it's very important. So keep at least minimum of 6 feet between the patients. Next comes like manpower logistic issues. Okay, so they should at least get 1:1 nursing, because see, we need to manage a dynamicity of the patient. So those who present with the acute respiratory distress who looks mild symptomatically can deteriorate very badly in fraction of hours. So it's very important. So give 1:1 allocation so that they can concentrate much on the patient and the care. So don't like extend the shift hours not more than 6 to 8 hours, because it is exhaustive. So they are going to have the mental like trauma, mental exhaustion. So it is not only physical. So don't extend the shift hours more than 6 to 8 hours. So proper preparedness drill is very important before like giving allocation to the nursing staff. It is very important. So conduct your own preparedness drill on donning and doffing of personal protective equipments, because see, when you have some sort of preparedness drill under controlled environment, the mistakes particularly which happen during the doffing of PPE is going to be minimized, because at the end of their 6 hours or 8 hour shift, with this mental exhaustion, there is a high chance they can have some mistakes while removing the PPE and they can get self-infected. So it is very important. Proper preparedness is very, very important in terms and for allocation. Next, when it comes to resident and consultants rota, so it is left to institution. It depends upon how the manpower, what pre-existing rota they are following, but consider don't extend not like anyone who is involved with the patient care intimately, like particularly ICU resident, don't extend their shift hours more than 6 to 8 hours. So then again, suppose how much duration, like in terms of number of days you have to stretch. Don't stretch continuously, not more than 5 to 7 days. At least you have some different pool of like manpower if available. So then again, we need to consider giving them isolation depending upon their risk profile after 5 to 7 days of their shift in the ICU. Because say someone is having susceptible people in their home, maybe elderly, pregnant, or like pediatric age group, so then they might require isolation for at least 2 weeks if they exposed to the patient, and if they involved in taking care of the patient with the intimacy, like if they involved in airway manipulation, putting the lines, so like giving the wash to the patient or clearing their secretion and all. So they need proper PPE with a post duty of 5 to 7 days of some isolation they require depending upon their risk profile. So again, it is very important. So with this pandemic, so everywhere lots of data is getting circulated, lots of numbers we came to know, lots of uh, bad outcomes like we used to listen through the media and all. It is very important. Healthcare staff, from the nursing to the paramedical to the doctors, we need a good moral support. So we need some sort of counseling if we are in stress because of the work hours, with the limited resources, with a bad outcome, with increased number of patients in the due course. It is also very important. So coming to management in terms of airway, so I told, so like in and around managing patients with mild, moderate, like severe ARDS patient, so we first prioritize the airway control. So our main goal here is don't create conversion of droplet to an aerosol. So you have to avoid aerosol generating procedure. So consider early intubation with rapid sequence intubation, so with appropriate PPEs. Now, like in Indian scenario, there are lots of developments happening. So you can put a hood while intubating the patient, or you can put like plastic cover while intubating the patient to avoid like spillage of the droplet onto the person who is intubating or onto the patient who is assisting the intubation. So avoid bag wall mask, avoid nebulizer instead of you give like meter dose therapy for the nebulization. So non-invasive ventilation should be avoided in the patient who is supposed to deteriorate. Don't drag on NIV for long time in a patient who requires like severely hypoxic and may requires intubation in the due course. So consider proceeding directly to endotracheal tube than keeping that waiting period, because so NIV and other high flow nasal cannula so can create conversion of like droplet to an aerosol, and which can create a problem. Suppose if you are using bag wall mask ventilation or other ventilatory equipment, make sure HEPA filter should be in the expiratory tube or expiratory air. It is very important to prevent the spread of the infection. Again, a bit on high flow nasal cannula. So currently there is no major data, pro-con data on whether to go for a high flow nasal cannula or not to use. You have to understand, see, when you give the high flow near to 60 liter, so then there is a more chance of breaking down of droplet to airborne infection. So if you give the flow somewhere around 30 to 40 liter, still we can safely give, but you should know where to put a pulley stop for high flow nasal cannula. So suppose if their oxygen requirement is like more than 60%, 70%, so if they are tachypneic, symptoms are not settling, gas is not improving, so still they are having increased work of breathing and all, so prematurely end the high flow nasal oxygen and convert them into invasive ventilation and put them on the ventilator. So this, see, you have to consider all these things on individual basis. So what harm you are going to do both to the patient and to the caregivers by prolonging the patient on high flow nasal cannula, that is very important. So when it comes to proper ventilation, so what oxygenation you have to target? So somewhere around 90 to 92% of peripheral oxygen saturation is good. So if the patient is having acute hypoxic respiratory failure, so target oxygenation so no more than 96%. So somewhere around 95 to 96% is adequate. So use proper lung protective ventilation when it comes to proper management of ARDS, like low tidal volume, somewhere around 4 to 8 ml per kg. So as compared to more than 8 ml per kg, keep the P plateau less than 30 centimeter of water. If you are able to calculate the driving pressure, use the driving pressure at the end inspiratory P plateau minus that of what PEEP you are applying. Keep driving pressure less than 14. So like other ARDS patient, one important thing here, see, in a patient who is very sick, you need to manipulate the ventilator very often. So suppose if you are able to disassemble the display part where we are going to manipulate P, tidal volume, FiO2 and all, if it is possible, disassemble with some extension wire, keep that part outside the isolation room so that you can avoid like multiple entry into the isolation room to adjust the ventilator setting. This is practical aspect you can consider in your own way where you work. Again, how to support hemodynamically. Okay, so suppose you think like patient is going to deteriorate, is badly tachypneic, badly hypoxic at the time of intubation, so his pressures are borderline, he needs some modality of the hemodynamic monitoring. Consider the same person who intubated finish up putting a central line and arterial line and come out. So then again going to the second setup, or then so some different person is going to scrub for that purpose. So measure the lactate. You can use the lactate as to guide your fluid therapy. So consider avoid aggressive fluid resuscitation, because most of the patient are not going to present with a shock when they have a COVID-19, except if they present atypically, like if they have vomiting or diarrhea, which can happen in about 5% of the patient. They can present with severe hypovolemia, so then they might require aggressive fluid resuscitation. Most of the patient, they have a admission lactate which was normal, so reported sepsis is in about less than 5% of the patient. Remember, cause of death in patient with COVID-19 is ARDS with severe hypoxia and other multi-organ involvement. So ARDS can get exacerbated with positive cumulative balance. So this we learned in our past experience also. Consider conservative fluid management. Use crystalloids over colloids. So lots of data. So we know that currently balanced or buffered crystalloids are the option as compared to normal saline, which can cause hyperchloremic metabolic acidosis with a normal anemia. So chloride can have an impact on the renal blood supply, so which is going to cause abnormal renal autoregulation, renal vasoconstriction. So they can have more and more requirement of the renal replacement therapy. Avoid so chloride rich fluids. Again, don't use colloids. Okay, so we have lots of data. So colloids versus crystalloids. Crystalloids is the option. So don't use hydroxyethyl starch. More chances of renal injury and more requirement of renal replacement therapy. So again, which agent to use as a vasoactive? We already know norepinephrine still the first line of therapy. Even current severe sepsis guidelines managing COVID-19 also advised to consider norepinephrine. So if not available, so then we can choose vasopressin or epinephrine. So target a mean arterial pressure somewhere between 60 to 65. So except in hypertensive patients who are chronically hypertensive, you can keep a bit map around 75 70. So other than that, 60 to 65 is adequate. So in patients with shock, so if they are having an ongoing hypoperfusion, like lactate is still high, if they are having a cardiac dysfunction, after adequately filling them off with a fluid and after adequately maintaining a mean arterial pressure with minimal norepinephrine, you can consider dobutamine as an antifailure. So adequately filled with the background of cardiac dysfunction with ongoing hypoperfusion manifestation, you can consider giving them dobutamine. So again, other supportive therapy is antimicrobials. Suppose if you consider, depending upon their clinical presentation, history and their image wise, if you think there is an existing bacterial cause for the pneumonia, you can consider adding antimicrobials. Maybe one beta-lactamase inhibitor will be like combination. So along with an atypical coverage as per your local protocol. May not be always mandatory, but you can consider with the pneumonia presentation. If you have a dilemma, so consider one beta-lactamase inhibitor with an atypical coverage. So again, consider one antiviral which we commonly use to treat is neuraminidase inhibitor, that is oseltamivir, to cover for influenza. Suppose if you have a dilemma, so whether it is a simple H1N1 pneumonia or COVID-19, till we are waiting for the investigation report to come, you can consider treating with neuraminidase inhibitor, that is oseltamivir, 75 milligram BD, or in a sicker patient, you can, in immunocompromised patient, you can give 150 milligram of BD of oseltamivir till you are going to rule out influenza. So de-escalate the empirical therapy based on your clinical judgment and what investigation report you are going to get. So some patient may behave very badly, might require continued antimicrobial therapy. So with COVID-19 diagnosis in hand also. So that depends upon clinical circumstances. Don't think, okay, I'll isolatedly treat only COVID-19, because we have a same simultaneous burden of bacterial pneumonia. In the same time, we have a burden of superated nosocomial pneumonia down the line after ventilated. So again, COVID-19 therapy, what add-on therapies? Lots of discussion happened on whether to give steroid or not. So currently we don't have any like strong evidence against giving a steroid also, but the patient is on mechanical ventilator for respiratory failure, if we don't have ARDS, so no need to use the corticosteroid. Suppose if the patient is on ventilator with respiratory failure and with severe ARDS, you can consider using methylprednisolone. Some data from the China so suggest they done well if you use methylprednisolone in terms of mortality, but we need a properly conducted evidence before we jump on that. So individualize the therapy. So again, what therapy you need to give to control the temperature? Lots of controversy, confusion regarding the NSAIDs, but safe NSAID to use to control the fever is paracetamol. Again, coming back to the steroid, suppose you want to give steroid as a part and parcel of your early adrenal insufficiency to treat septic shock, you can consider going ahead with the steroid, not standalone therapy for COVID-19 with bit stable without any ARDS. So again, a bit on myocarditis. I told, so most of the patient who died in Spain and Italy, they had younger age group and they had severe myocarditis and cardiomyopathy. So they have elevated troponin. So, but if you've done an angio, so there is no coronary thrombus or coronary vasospasm. So troponin elevation had a good prognostic indicator in those patients also. So they reported near about 7% of the patient who died because of COVID-19 were having fulminant myocarditis. In about 12% of the patient, they had severe arrhythmia which required ICU admission. So most of the patient I told, younger generation. So mainly we have to adhere to the our regular management of myocarditis or cardiomyopathy. So control the heart rate, keep them sinus rhythm as much as possible. So we can consider anti-failure medication appropriately. So individualize the therapy. Maybe see if the heart rate is adequately controlled, if they are having an adequate mean arterial pressure, you can go for dobutamine. If they are having an ongoing hypoperfusion, somewhere between 2 to 10 mics per kg per minute. So other anti-failure medications like you can consider combined alpha and beta blocker. So depending upon their so measured contractility, that the ejection fraction, heart rate, hemodynamics, that is the mean arterial pressure. So and how they are going to tolerate any kind of anti-failure medication. We don't have any much data specific to management of myocarditis in COVID-19, but assume so you can manage like other viral myocarditis, how you are going to manage regularly. You can consider that therapy as an anti-failure medication if they had a low contractility. Again, move on to specific therapy. So when I am going to speak specific therapy per se, currently we don't have any specific therapy for COVID-19 in ICU. So I'll just go through some sort of data, some what are the newer things which are happening in other part of the world. So in terms of finding what is specific therapy in managing COVID-19. So first thing which comes to our mind is hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine. We know that these are the age-old anti-malarial agents. So previously they used to give chloroquine tablet approaching village by village. So healthcare workers, they used to come, they used to ask, is there anyone suffering from the malaria? Is any symptoms across other family members? So they used to give the chloroquine tablets. So what is the rationale to use the chloroquine? So there is some in vitro like data to suggest chloroquine acts against SARS-CoV-2, that is COVID-19, have some immunomodulating properties. So this is the theoretical in vitro data which is available on hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine. How it is going to happen? So they inhibit like viral enzymes, particularly RNA polymerase, viral protein glycosylation, viral assembly. So new generation of virus particle, virus release and transport of the virus particulate. So they also inhibit angiotensin converting enzyme 2. They create acidification at the cell surface so that they prevent the attachment of the virus to the cell. They prevent some cytokine release and cytokine storm also. So particularly these are proposed theories. So had some rationale with some in vitro data, but when you compare hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine, which is more effective, more potent, that is the hydroxychloroquine, with a good antiviral efficacy and safe. So when you consider giving hydroxychloroquine or chloroquine, so you have to remember some adverse effect, because see, so both the medications are known to cause QT prolongation and life-threatening arrhythmias. They are known to cause very bad nausea and vomiting, retinopathy. So in patients who are having a G6PD deficiency, you have to be very cautious in jumping on giving chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine. But safety profile, so hydroxychloroquine is bit better as compared to chloroquine in terms of the safety, efficacy, and the potency. Again, what is the current evidence? Okay, this is one data which arrived in the early March 2020. So hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin as a treatment of COVID-19. So it's an open label, non-randomized clinical trial. So French, they reported in about 20 patients. So single arm study. So in early March to March 16, they included the patient. So those patients who received hydroxychloroquine about 600 milligram daily, their viral load was low in terms of in their nasopharyngeal swabs. They were doing daily viral load in the nasopharyngeal swab, which was low in patients who received hydroxychloroquine. So depending upon their clinical presentation, add-on drug was, that is atypical coverage, macrolide, azithromycin. We already know that. So macrolides are having some immunomodulating capacity. In previous our data in treating atypical pneumonia, ARDS, lots of data available, macrolide showing some sort of immunomodulating effect. So those patients were not actively participated in this protocol, and the patient from another center has been used as a negative control. So again, what is the report? So they included near about 20 cases. So during the study period, showed significant reduction of viral carriage at day 6 post inclusion compared to the control, and much lower average carrying duration also. So despite a small data, so it's a 20 patient, so they have some clue. If you club together, so hydroxychloroquine with the macrolide like azithromycin, you can get rid of viral load. Also, disappearance of the virus from the COVID-19 patients. But the problem is it's very small data, single center. Even with this small data, there was a dropout of about 6 patients, and so there was no long-term follow-up. So we are interested in the outcome, what is the mortality benefit. With this small data, they were not able to have any long-term outcome follow-up. So don't jump on hydroxychloroquine at this current moment. Again, so what is the pooled data? So when we have some here and there case reports or cohort data, we are going to have something called systemic review on the efficacy and safety of chloroquine for the treatment of COVID-19, which is not yet published. So it is just in the pipeline. So journal pre-proof, it's going to get published in Journal of Critical Care Medicine. So which conclude, so they included near about 6 article, 1 narrative letter, 1 in vitro study, 1 editorial, some expert consensus paper, 2 national guideline documents, along with 23 ongoing clinical trials in China. They included in this pre-publication data. So chloroquine seems to be effective in limiting the replication of COVID-19 in vitro. This is the background. So what they conclude, there is a rationale, preclinical evidence of effectiveness and evidence of safety, long time clinical use for other indication to justify clinical research on chloroquine in patient with COVID-19. So both safety and efficacy is there non-COVID patient. So suppose you want to use chloroquine or hydroxychloroquine currently for treating COVID-19, it should be monitored emergency use of unregistered intervention, or it should be a part and part clinical trial. Okay, so currently generalizing using hydroxychloroquine or chloroquine, we don't have safety data. We need so high quality clinical trials on urgent basis. So conclusion, so no way we are going to use HCQ or chloroquine on all the patients who had COVID-19, unless otherwise you are going to participate in clinical trial. Again, one more thing which came with some rationale was antiviral therapy. So that is lopinavir and ritonavir. So what is the general concept on this? So this is a combination of antiviral agents we used on patients with retropositive, that is HSV, HIV, even as a post-exposure prophylaxis also. So compared to newer nucleoside like inhibitor, that is remdesivir, so lopinavir, ritonavir has advantage because we already know their toxicity profile, like side effects, the interaction, and how the patient is going to tolerate. Because these two drugs already used in HIV patient, we know some PKPD profile, some side effects, some drug interaction. So one more data suggests, suppose if you add ribavirin to the lopinavir and ritonavir, this cocktail of three drugs so have a more efficacy than when you give them as an individual isolated drug. So this is the concept, this is a general concept. So how they are going to act? We know that lopinavir, ritonavir, they are the protease inhibitor which block viral replication. So it is an agent which acts directly on the virus. So, but ritonavir is the one which potentiate the lopinavir action. So which is a CYP3A inhibitor which functions primarily to reduce the metabolism of lopinavir, thereby boosting the effect of lopinavir. So ritonavir not directly acts on the virus, but it helps in potentiating the action of lopinavir, which is directly is going to act an antiviral property. This is the general concept. Again, what is the evidence? This is a one open label randomized study from the Wuhan, China. So on using 400 milligram of lopinavir and 100 milligram of ritonavir, so respectively twice a day for 14 days in addition to standard care. So this is the data which suggests, so in this study, they included near about 200 adult patients with the COVID-19. So those who are confirmed pneumonia on the basis of radiology and with a saturation of less than 94%, the partial pressure of oxygen less than 300. So did not differ significantly in time to clinical improvement. So even though so the group which they received lopinavir ritonavir showed some lower 28-day mortality, which was not statistically significant. So duration of intensive care unit stay, duration of mechanical ventilation, days of oxygen support, there was no difference between lopinavir, ritonavir and other control group. So COVID-19 RNA concentration in the throat swab of both the groups were also similar. So no much difference. So what we can comment on this trial, we know that lopinavir and ritonavir, everyone is happy because we already know the medication, we already know the PKPD side effects, adverse events, drug interaction and all, which are broadly available oral therapy. We assumed, okay, if this therapy works on COVID-19, it's very fantastic. But unfortunately, there is no data to suggest this magic bullet is going to work. So effects are neither striking or nor significant. Despite these, WHO still having some more. Okay, it is still advising to conduct some clinical trial in a good way, whether we can have some benefit with a pre-existing medication that is lopinavir and ritonavir. However, based on structure of COVID-19 protease, or to remember the HIV virus protease is structurally different than that of the COVID-19. So lopinavir and ritonavir may not act on the protease like that of the HIV as compared to that of the COVID-19. Again, so some more data on some therapy they are trying is convalescent plasma. So what they are doing is plasma which is collected from the recovered COVID-19 patient. So they are going to try to give to the patients who are having severe life-threatening illness because of COVID-19. So they have some criteria whom to label them as severe and whom to label them as immediate life-threatening COVID-19 infection. So make sure plasma should contain the antibody like IgG and IgM against the COVID-19. So it is still under the trial. Yesterday we got some data, 4 patients has been successfully treated with convalescent plasma of the COVID-19, but it is not meant to general approach in all the patients who is having COVID-19. Definitely this we can't use as a prophylactic to prevent the COVID-19 viral infection in healthy patients. So it is only trial basis in severe or life-threatening, immediate life-threatening COVID-19 infection. Need to wait on this for more and more papers to come, more and more evidence to come in this pandemic. Currently, so some more therapy in the pipeline. So one is the antiviral, that is favipiravir, combined with tocilizumab. So in the treatment of COVID-19, there is an ongoing trial. See, again, one antiviral, which is a neuraminidase inhibitor, and one monoclonal antibody, which is going to inhibit the interleukin 6. Initially, I told, so lots of cytokine storm will be there, which is proposed as one of the mechanism of cellular injury in patients with COVID-19. So they're trying to target this interleukin 6 with tocilizumab is a monoclonal antibody, but the problem is it's been used already in rheumatoid arthritis patient, quite costly, single dose, which is going to cost about 46,000. So then we don't know the cost effectiveness when we have some clinical data on this monoclonal antibody. So there is one trial, they are clubbing this antiviral with a monoclonal antibody. So against that of the antiviral alone or monoclonal antibody alone. So from the China again this study. So we have to wait for the primary outcome analysis, clinical cure rate. So or normalization of the lung imaging, body temperature, so which persist for more than 3 days. Some clinical cure rate, some criteria they kept on this antiviral and monoclonal antibody. We have to wait for the result to come. So again, there are lots of confusion on AC inhibitor, angiotensin receptor blockers, whether to continue, whether to stop. Currently, we don't have any convincing data either the way. There are some trials they are using like losartan because we know that angiotensin converting enzyme 2 plays a major role in the entry of virus into the cell. So suppose you use so angiotensin receptor blocker like losartan against that of the placebo. So prior to the hospitalization in healthy individuals and in those patients who are already hospitalization. So with COVID-19, so there are some ongoing simultaneous trials which we have to wait for the result. Currently, there is no for or against stopping AC inhibitors on angiotensin receptor blockers. Again, some confusion. So there are some editorials came in the early March suggesting that NSAIDs like ibuprofen has increased ACE2 expression in COVID-19 patients with a worse outcome. So currently, FDA is advised to conduct some more studies on NSAIDs in patients with COVID-19, but both European Society and Society of Critical Care Medicine so suggest using paracetamol as a measure to control the therapy as compared to other NSAIDs. We need some more data, but there is some hint which can have some interaction with the angiotensin converting enzyme receptors till now. So safest to use as an antibiotic is non-ibuprofen, that is the paracetamol. So again, see, I told initially, so there is no current specific therapy for COVID-19. Lots of ifs, so's like are happening. So we don't know, like we have to wait for some more data. In this waiting period, so what therapy we can consider, okay? So there is some editorial published on March 24 so on JAMA which suggests, so treating COVID-19 off-label drug use, compassionate use, and randomized clinical trials during the the existing pandemic. So the rapid and simultaneous combination of supportive care and RCTs is the only way to find effective and safe treatment for COVID-19 and any other future outbreak. So this we have to remember. So currently we have existing proven supportive care. Along with that, non-proven, so trial and error specific therapy that as a part of so clinical trial. So and we have to continue both. So we have to wait for outcome analysis and more data. So one last slide on the utility of ECMO. You have to remember in pandemic we are struggling to get the ICU bed, struggling to get the basic oxygen therapy devices like regular liquid oxygen, so saturation monitoring devices, manpower. So you have to be very prudent. ECMO is not a therapy to be rushed to the front line when all resources are restricted in a pandemic. Okay, so we know in patients who had H1N1 pandemic, we got a good paper on ECMO, but currently the burden, the need of resources, the expected worry, expected spread is going to be very huge. So don't rush on spending too much resource on ECMO. Concentrate on the basic therapy which are going to save the life of patients. Conclude. So in the era of pandemic, preventive measures are very important. Consider so proper protective equipments, personal protective equipments, when to consider quarantine, isolation. So only about 30% of the patient require hospitalization and 4% are going to require the ICU care. Still, with this huge pandemic burden, that number may increase in near future. Most of the ICU care is like other patients with ARDS or respiratory failure, like give them a lung protective ventilation, conservative fluid therapy, so steroid in severe cases. So individualize the therapy with a steroid like those who are having severe ARDS with respiratory failure or mechanical ventilation, antibiotic and other antiviral, particularly oseltamivir, as appropriately. So no for hydroxychloroquine or chloroquine currently for all patients with COVID-19. No lopinavir or ritonavir. We need some more data on that. So with strict infection prevention and control policies, so prioritize the therapy with limited resources. It means so when a patient is too sick in ICU with the multimodality of the therapy, with some comorbidities, with advanced age, with the limited resources, we have to consider down the line how to triage whom to get prioritized therapy on their clinical, comorbid, and prognostic criteria. So with this, I'll conclude my lecture. So in future will come more and more data on different aspects of COVID-19 like diagnostic criteria and diagnostic methodologies, their limitation. Thank you all. Have a nice day.